So, Marx publishes the manifesto as 1847 turns to 1848. February, revolutions break out. Not because of the manifesto, but imagine how they must have felt having said that these revolutions were about to happen, and then suddenly they break out in France and Paris in February, and then through Central Europe in March, and later into the spring, all over Europe. Middle class and working class people, peasants even, are getting involved in saying, we need a change. We need to overthrow the old system. Now, at least that's how it looks to Marx and his comrades in the winter and spring of 1848. But Marx sees that the revolutions don't turn out the way he expected them to unfold dialectically in the Communist Manifesto. In fact, the revolutions go in the wrong direction eventually. And from 1848 to 1851, even into 1852, what Marx experiences is a period of great disillusion. And it's this theme of disillusionment that we'll be talking about today, and that will lead us into one of the great masters of disillusion, Gustave Flaubert. Remember, for Marx, disillusion was a theme of the manifesto. The bourgeoisie actually disillusioned us in history. That is, they showed that all the things we believed in, all these fancy, sentimental terms, were actually illusions, and what mattered was economics. What really mattered was class struggle and history. What Marx sees in 1848 to 1850 are more illusions falling away. But they fall away very painfully for people who are trying to create change. In France, the king in 1848 is Louis Philippe, who was himself installed by a revolution in 1830. So he's a king on shaky ground. In fact, they called him, but lots of bad names actually, but they called him the bourgeois king because he walked around in a suit, he carried an umbrella, which kings aren't supposed to do, someone's supposed to carry it for them. And he was trying to be a modern king, not like the person he deposed, Charles X, who was very, very reactionary. Louis Philippe was open to change. They even said he played the stock market. But nonetheless, in February 1848, he flees to the safety of England, as I recall, and the revolution is breaking out. But what happens in 1848 in that spring is that it becomes clear that the interests of all the revolutionaries are not identical. The peasants, what do the peasants want? What they always want? They want land. What do the workers want? They want jobs. They want a decent wage. And the middle classes, they want power and money. And their desire for power and money is not compatible with the desire of the workers for a decent wage and more jobs, and may not be compatible with the demand of peasants for land. And so the coalition of the winter of 1848 breaks apart between February and June. And Marx, he writes about this in various places. One place that we quote on the slides is the class struggles in France, where he writes, "The present generation is like the Jews, whom Moses led through the wilderness. It has not only a new world to conquer, it must go under in order to make room for the men who are fit for a new world." Notice that phrase, this generation must go under. In other words, Marx is saying, well, revolution is not around the corner. And just like the Jews had to wander in the desert for 40 years, we may have a much longer road than I anticipated with Engels in the manifesto. And then Marx sees how these events unfold and becomes very ironic about the destiny of political change in the middle of the 19th century. He says that the February Revolution was the beautiful revolution, as when everybody was brothers and sisters and we're all fighting for the same cause. But later on, in June of 1848, you get the ugly revolution. The workers are in the streets of Paris saying, we want jobs, we want food, we want wages that will allow us to live well. And their former allies in the middle class bring out the army, often filled with the ranks with the peasants from the countryside coming into Paris, and the workers get slaughtered in the streets. It's a very bloody time. It's called the June Days. It's a very important event in European history when it's clear that the The middle class and the working class, both of whom think they're making progress, actually don't see progress in the same way. And Marx puts it this way: the February Revolution was the beautiful revolution, being very sarcastic here, right? The revolution of universal sympathy, because the contradictions, remember that word, because the contradictions which erupted in it against the monarchy were still undeveloped and peacefully dormant. The June Revolution, by contrast, is the ugly revolution, the nasty revolution, because the phrases have given place to the real thing. It's so important for us here to see that, because for Marx, the ugly revolution is the true revolution. That is the revelation of truth. Beauty hides the truth. It's the ugly, real slaughter of the workers that shows you the truth of the middle class interest. He says elsewhere there that, I think it goes like this: liberty, equality, and fraternity, you know, the great triumvirate from the French Revolution, it really means infantry, cavalry, and artillery. That in other words, we'll turn the guns on our former allies because we want to make money. We want to have power. So the Paris working class protests in the city. They come marching through the city. They seem to be victorious. And then the businessmen and the professors and the bourgeois students, they say, well, this is not what we meant by revolution. Yeah, we didn't want the working class actually getting property. We didn't want them taking over. We need the army to come in. And the army comes in June of 1848 with lots of French peasants from the good old days of Napoleon. And they just mow down, shoot down, murder working class protesters. Marx says, I don't think I have this in the slide, he says, what was revealed, what were the words of February? The words were liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? That's from the 1789 revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Marx says what they really meant were infantry, cavalry, and artillery. That's what it really was about. The truth of bourgeois rule is violence. Not equality, not liberty, not fraternity. That's beautiful stuff. And it's false. The sentimental halo of revolution. What really matters is the first day of class, money, right? Liberty, equality, fraternity, really infantry, cavalry, and artillery. And so the June Revolution shows that peaceful social change is not going to happen. So Marx, he becomes disillusioned with politics. More about that in a minute, although we don't read his later work. As do other people at the time. Another thinker which would be fun to read together in this class, we don't have time this time through, is Alexis de Tocqueville. We've seen him before. De Tocqueville was it's now called a conservative thinker. It's probably he was a thinker that is not easily who's not easily categorized. For Tocqueville in 1848, what he saw was an eruption of anarchy, where you just didn't know if the people who were your former colleagues, friends, people the shopkeeper you bought stuff from, if they were going to just cut your throat. For him, it was a breakdown of sympathy and polity, and a threat of the end of civilization. For Marx, he thinks that the true violence of capitalism is revealed, but it's not clear to him where politics is going to go. And although we don't go on with this in Marx, what Marx does after 1851, after the failures of this revolution, when Louis Napoleon Bonaparte becomes a dictator in France after this revolutionary period, Marx begins to look below the surface of history for real meaning. I'd say a word about that for those of you who are interested in going on to read more Marx. So we read the 1844 manuscripts, a section of that, and then the manifesto from 1847. After 1852, Marx is more and more inclined to look not at class struggle on the surface of history, but to dig to the economic laws beneath history that really are where the true action is. I could put it this way. In the manifesto, the really real for Marx is class struggle. After the failures of 1848, the really real for Marx become economic laws. And the project of Capital, the multi-volume work where he tries to uncover the laws of history, those are laws that act whether or not we realize them. We don't have to struggle for them. They happen. They just happen. And so Marx had a reading of history in 1847. After 1852, he really wants to have a science of economics because history isn't going the right way. So economics will be where the action is, the really real. The thinker we're going to focus on for the rest of this week, Gustave Flaubert, had a different reaction in 1848, and just give you a taste of it, because Flaubert looked at this and he just saw not the revelation of the ugly truth, but of the kind of banality and stupidity of politics. So Flaubert's reaction, as a lot of his friends, is to withdraw from the public realm with a sense of irony well, listen to it. You'll hear it. Flaubert writes, "What taste, what cuisine, what wines, and what speeches." Because at the time of these protests, people would get together around banquets to make protests. And Flaubert just thought this was so ridiculous, and that all they were going for was the food, the smorgasbord, not the sense of justice or something. And he writes, "Nothing could make me more scornful of success, considering the price at which it is purchased. I sat unmoved, nauseated by the patriotic fervor they whipped up with mealy platitudes, such as the abyss towards which we are running, the honor of our flag, the shadow cast by the standards, the fraternity of peoples." For Flaubert, these are empty banalities, cliches. And if you were a thoughtful person, you would get away from politics. If you had talent, you would not waste it trying to convince people to follow you. If you had capacity for greatness, you would become an artist, and you would get as far away from debates and politics as possible. Leave that to the hypocrites and the liars, because that's the only thing they can do. So where Marx goes to do the science of economics, Flaubert and a generation we can call aestheticists, and really what we'll come to call modernists, they say we need to move away from history and focus on art.